for agenda item number 9, which is the mayor's 10-year retrospective. And so I have a slideshow with some photos of people, projects, and accomplishments and aspirations. So pardon me just a minute while I get over there by the big machine. Okay, so some of you may remember back in 2003 when I was a rookie candidate with John Dickinson running for Moscow City Council, kind of a reluctant candidate at that. It was a 2-year seat. I didn't know what I was getting myself in for, but John's enthusiasm and his love of all things to do with helping people really was contagious, and I came to love the work a lot. As my tenure comes to a close, the first week of January, I want people to know that I have not taken the responsibility or the privilege of this role for granted. And together we have accomplished a lot over the last decade. Let me back up here. I think, there we are. So this was the city council back then. You might recognize some of those folks. We have from left to right Peg Hamlet, Linda Paul, then Mayor Marshall Comstock, John Dickinson, John Kimberling, and myself. The council member who is not pictured is Joanne Mack.
I see her arm.
You can see her.
Her hand.
Is Joanne's hand someplace?
And her feet down below.
Really?
Between
Okay.
Peg and Linda.
All right, hiding in there, okay. So we became Moscow, the United States' first new city. This was a concept Linda Paul brought back from a National League of Cities conference. And the concept was that we have two universities so close together, why don't we capitalize on that? That idea has morphed into the economic engine now called the Palouse Knowledge Corridor. The same person, Sylvia Lovely, who was a consultant on this, coming from the Kentucky League of Cities, was presenting a seminar at the National League of Cities conference I just attended in Seattle last month, and the topic was the local foods movement across the country. And she said that several of the cities, such as Denver, were quite far advanced in the local food movement. They knew quite a lot about it, and the model she used for excellence and for them to aspire to emulate was Moscow, Idaho. On each of my campaigns, I've consistently run on a platform of open, accessible, responsive government. And so probably the thing that I am most proudest of was the 2004 City Council's decision to change the meeting schedules. City councils back then used to meet in the afternoon. They might grab a bite of dinner and they would come back to the council meeting that evening. So meeting at the committee level first, have a bite to eat, reconvene as a full council, and vote on those things. And we put at least a week's worth of break in the middle of that so the public could have time to become informed, ask questions, and so the policymakers could mull things over. Other things that city council accomplished: we created the Human Rights Commission by an ordinance. We established the Water Conservation Ordinance. We passed the Public Art Ordinance, setting aside 1% of the city's portion of the capital projects for public art. And the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center opened that year. In 2005, we passed the Outdoor Lighting Ordinance and the Large Retail Establishment Emergency Ordinance. So 2005, here's a quote from Yogi Berra. It says, here's his advice: if you come to a fork in the road, take it. And that's exactly what the voters did in 2005. They elected a majority of progressive candidates for Moscow City Council, and you might have thought we'd turned the city on its ear, but we just accomplished a lot of really good things. So in 2006, we created and elevated the status of the Tree Commission, which had been kind of buried in the community forestry ordinance before that. And that's what we heard from Sarah Church's students today about the urban forest and the tree planting that might go on here. We formalized the Large Retail Establishment Ordinance. We dissolved the Bicycle Advisory Committee and incorporated that as an equally valid partner on the Transportation Commission, with the idea that bicycles are reasonable, equal players in the multimodal system. We initiated the work to identify sites for surface water collection and water conservation measures, including increasing use of treated effluent. We initiated the city's revision of the comprehensive plan. As Bill Belknap knows so well, we started the Green Building Medallion program there. It's presently just for residential purposes. Kelly Moore, who's seated in the front row tonight, built the first green house in Moscow and got that medallion on the wall. So that's a wonderful program. It's an alternative to the more expensive LEED certification, but comparable standards. And I think it's a model for other places. I have taken that to state and national conferences to share with other communities. Hopefully it'll expand to commercial opportunities in the near future. The City Council at that time began to emphasize the need for expanding the housing stock to include retirement housing and townhouses and row houses. And so some things never change. We're still on that same topic now. As first-time mayor, I started the open mic segment, as we heard tonight, with at the beginning of council meetings, so the public could share things that we maybe hadn't thought to put on those agendas. We started analyzing the downtown parking situation and took an inventory and took a critical view of the policies pertaining to parking in the Central Business District. We articulated support for a bicycle pedestrian bridge at 3rd and Mountain View. I established the grants manager position, and I think we've all agreed that Elisa Stone has done a fabulous job for the city. Last I heard, we were bringing in between $1 and $1.5 million per year, in large part due to her good work and the collaboration she has with all city departments. We started the sustainability internship. We heard from Keegan Caldwell tonight in his presentation about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, but he's one of a series of interns, and it's a great model for us to work with University of Idaho students to do things like the sustainability assessment that we started back in 2006. I started a protocol to formalize the thanks that we express to our volunteer commissioners. As I said at the opening of tonight's meeting, it's hugely important to the well-being of our city that we have such talented and generous people dedicating their time as volunteers. We sought a designation for a downtown historic district, which subsequently came to pass. National League of Cities named Moscow as the nation's first, or as the only inclusive community in Idaho because of our diversity, our outreach, our embracing our differences and celebrating those. I started the Earth Day Awards, and that's been an annual event that's been pretty well received, I think, a chance to recognize good work for sustainable practices, and then issued the Mayor's Arts Awards that year. The 2006 City Council looked like that. Look how young everybody was. John Weber, is he still back there? Oh. Anyway.
He left.
So the 2006 City Council supported extending the health insurance benefits that were offered by our insurance provider to domestic partners of employees, including same-sex partners and their dependents. This 2006 City Council also supported the state's first so-called living wage for city employees and contractors whose services exceeded $25,000 per year, which mostly affected our janitorial services. That particular resolution was rescinded in 2010. There's John Dickinson. Looks a little different than a lot of us might have remembered him, but as I mentioned earlier, he and I met in 2003 as rookie candidates for City Council. I think most people who met him recognized him as an optimist who loved helping people. So on January 3rd, 2007, the day after he was elected City Council President and 4 days before he would die, stopping to help at a car accident on Interstate 84. but it was going to be 7 months before they recovered his body from the river. But John told me on that day, January 2007, that the accomplishment that gave him the most satisfaction in his tenure on the City Council was securing the 4-way stop signs near the schools and the youth recreation facilities at D and Mountain View. That was the one thing. Of all the phenomenal things he did, and some of you know he became involved in local politics because his graduate student, Sammy Hussein, was accused of terrorist activities. And John came to his aid and stuck by him throughout until Sammy was released and allowed to go home. But the void that John left was profound, and it changed the trajectory of our city and our lives in many ways. We had another tragedy in 2007. Our Officer Lee Newbill was killed in the line of duty. The gunman, a sniper, also took the lives of his own wife, Crystal Hamilton, who worked at our courthouse, and the church sexton, Paul Bauer, from the Moscow Presbyterian Church. In addition to his own life, he wounded several other people, and our community pulled together in grief and with resolve. Also in 2007, a University of Idaho student, David Boss, was shot to death execution style. And then Chief of Police Dan Weaver, then President of the University Tim White, and I held a joint press conference to speak frankly about violence in our community and our society. In 2007, with the protracted 7-month-long status that John Dickinson had as simply missing prior to recovery of his body, and we had a legal prohibition of appointing a replacement for him, although that state law has since been changed. We had the sniper shooting rampage that I mentioned. That was in May, in the context of the Virginia Tech shootings in April, that execution-style shooting also in April. We had recurrent hospitalizations of our council member, Linda Paul, who thankfully is doing much better these days. If you've seen her out and about, she's still mixing it up. We had the resignation of council member Bob Stout, who resigned to join the Hillary Clinton campaign in Iowa. And all of those stressors, I think, put strains on our city council, the remaining colleagues who were there, and on the public, who that November had another big political shift manifest at the polls. So I would mention on the matter of firearms, it is still illegal in Idaho to have guns in schools or in courtrooms, that colleges and universities have the authority to prohibit them on campus, but under the exclusive authority of the Idaho legislature, it is legal to bring guns into city council chambers and youth recreation facilities like our aquatic center, both of which we have seen demonstrated. This is the 2008 City Council. You probably recognize most of those faces. Left to right, we have Walter Steed, Wayne Krause, Bill Lambert, myself as mayor, John Weber, Tom Lamar, and Dan Carscallon. The first ordinance of this council passed, which was, it turned out to be really successful, but at the time it was very controversial. Anybody remember? It was the noise ordinance. Yeah. And also, that was the year that the Water Department started the Yscape Recognition Program for water conserving landscapes, which I think has been very successful. And that name, by the way, was coined by Nicole Baker, our very own water conservation specialist. So go see Nicole at the Water Department and get some free conservation devices over there. The 2008 City Council began its journey in the midst of the comprehensive plan revision, and that included an impressive amount and a very intense amount of citizen involvement, which seemed to surprise and impress the consultants who seemed beside themselves. Bill Belknap took it in stride. It was his invaluable work and that of his team in the Community Development Department that allowed us to make this visionary document Moscow's own. So the comprehensive plan doesn't have legal teeth per se, but it definitely is the community's collective vision, and it's a wonderful document, thanks in large part to Bill and his staff. So good job, Bill. Howling at the Hamilton was a rousing success. We started that in 2008 as well. It's a fundraiser for the Humane Society of the Palouse. It's the brainchild of Emily Spellman, whose husband, Jeff, is an employee here in City Hall. It's a very successful fundraiser and a lot of fun. I remember talking with some mayoral counterparts from around the region, and they go, oh, yeah, we have those events all the time, and we had 25 dogs last year. Well, Moscow's first effort at this, we had 250 dogs, and our record so far is 395, so stay tuned. So there. In 2009, Officer Rick Whitmore was the local coordinator for Moscow's leg of the International Law Enforcement Torch Run for Special Olympics. And for me, it was such a valuable reminder of what gives life meaning. If you've hung out with Special Olympic athletes, you know it's about friendship, fun, mutual support, and trying one's best. And they did. It was a terrific event. In that same year, Moscow continued the scientific approach to setting greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. I wanted to have a measurable baseline for those, much to the dismay of some people who would have urged this along sooner, but we're getting there. We embraced the concept of mixed-use zoning for Legacy Crossing, which would subsequently come to be. We stepped up our support for public transit in a pretty major way. We became the first city in the state to ban smoking in bars. That was by ordinance 2009-14, and we passed the important but much maligned chicken ordinance. So that was 2009-23.
No toms allowed.
That's right, no toms. Uh-oh, let me back up here. There you go. So 2010, Malcolm Renfrew celebrated his 100th birthday with a big party, including the University of Idaho pep band. And President Nellis described Malcolm as a 20th and 21st century Renaissance man because of his involvement in, quote, community engagement, music, the arts, and philanthropy. And for those of you who knew Malcolm Renfrew, you know that there's a chemistry building named after him. He had an illustrious career as a physical scientist and research chemist. He held some 15 patents. He was associated with the DuPont team that created Teflon. And Dr. Renfrew, along with his wife Carol, were institutions in our community. So for all of the recognition he received in the sciences, those things that President Nellis singled out about him were those things close to the heart, the community engagement, music, the arts, and philanthropy. Malcolm died this year at the age of 103, and it was a very good life indeed. I ribbed him one time after they moved out to Good Sam. I said, Malcolm, I'm missing your letters to the editor. And sure enough, he just popped one out right there, so he could still do it. In 2010, we completed Phase 4 of Moscow's wastewater treatment plant to control phosphorus discharges, and Phase 5 is addressing the temperature and dissolved oxygen requirements. In 2010, our then chief building official in the Community Development Department, Carol Alexander, was named Building Official of the Year in Idaho. Carol has since retired, but she's the person who started that cool little garden between the parking lot over there and the sidewalk by the Mann Building. We had federal stimulus funding that year to install 95 curb ramp improvements and to add 3 new bus shelters, making a total of 11 new shelters that year. In 2010, I convened the first of the Poverty on the Palouse series of meetings, which was captured the attention of a number of folks, including Moscow League of Women Voters, which spent a little bit over a year working on a study. That study is now posted on the National League of Women Voters website, and just a couple weeks ago, some of the Moscow League were invited over to Pullman to present that as a model for the Pullman League's upcoming study. We'll see what they do with that, but I've heard that study referenced a number of times by benevolent organizations, by agencies that have cited it as a reference, as a justification for their grant requests, and the Inland Northwest Community Foundation, at least, has said they pay attention when they see references to the work we've been doing here. So in addition to helping grantors, Moscow now has the CHAS Clinic, the Community Health Association of Spokane, and with an influx of some $650,000 here just in the last month or so, they became a federally qualified health center looking to expand the services that are offered to people who are underinsured, as well as anybody else who may want to go there. We've established Family Promise of the Palouse, and Bruce and Kathy Pittman were driving forces in getting that initiated. We took one of the City of Moscow van pool rigs down to Lewiston that summer, and we learned about Family Promise, what it could mean. It's temporary housing for homeless families in area churches, whether they're sponsored churches or they're host congregations, or they just help each other by bringing food or attending the day center, which just had a ribbon cutting here in this last week. The need and the enthusiasm to continue these cooperative efforts is high, and we will have another meeting of the Poverty on the Palouse group this Wednesday here in City Council chambers. The Southeast Moscow Industrial Park concept plan was developed in 2010, a 78-acre park at the southern city limits down there around Fountain Aviation. It would reconfigure the floodplain. I've heard reference to maybe expanding the buildable area by some 80%, having that light industry restored to our community, since we have sort of folded that into mixed-use development and other purposes. We had the railroad and agricultural uses in the core of our town, and now we're going to be seeing some of this legacy crossing development, which is a wonderful idea, displacing those formerly industrial uses in that area. So being able to have light manufacturing, assembly, bringing ideas from our research institutions, our universities to reality at a place like that, possibly having apprenticeship and certificate programs for those folks who may not be inclined to four-year college credentials or beyond, but some real opportunities with that site, plus helping meet EPA standards for stormwater management. Paradise Creek daylighting and Stadium Drive improvements were the two projects in 2010 that then interim President Stephen Daley Larson and I set as our priorities. We hope to be able to accomplish two things. Neither of us initiated those programs, but those were the tops on our list, and we thought they were doable, and sure enough they were. That was a collaborative endeavor involving the university, the Army Corps of Engineers, the City of Moscow, Idaho Transportation Department, and Palouse Clearwater Environmental Institute, among others. The project complements the other priority we set, which was the fully signalized intersection and that long-awaited crosswalk at Pullman Road with the extension of Peterson Drive to Stadium Drive. In 2011, the City Council passed Resolution 2011-04 that supported the Bag It campaign to reduce distribution, use, and disposal of plastic bags through outreach, education, and voluntary cooperation by businesses. And in that same year, the controversial so-called megaloads began to rumble through our downtown en route to the Alberta tar sands. Among the things the city council member, Walter Steed, told me when I inquired of council members and city staff, Walter said one of the things he's most proud of is declaring that megaloads would have no effect on Moscow infrastructure as they move through town on state highways. That remains kind of a controversial issue, and I think probably not going away soon. There we go, Legacy Crossing. So in 2012, the ordinance number 10 established the overlay zone for Legacy Crossing, which is a timely idea for transit-oriented, walkable, bikeable, mixed-use development. It earned the 2013 Idaho Smart Growth Award for Planning and Policy, again, in large part to the vision of our Community Development Department for being able to articulate the vision for this. Moscow Urban Renewal Agency has been working hard on the model for this, and our City Council saw fit to support that concept of the overlay zone. Speaking of biking, in that zone, the 2012 Ride Idaho Cycling Tour came through Moscow. Again, they drew 360 riders and 40 to 50 volunteers representing 31 states and Canada. The time before they came through was 2007. So I think recreational tourism has a real draw here, especially as we see our bicycle pedestrian trails and these maps that show loops. I'm optimistic about what might happen between Colfax and Pullman, for example, and speaking with the mayor of Colfax about the possibilities there. The L'État Trail is about to extend that route from Troy down to Kendrick and to the Julietta Trail. So possibilities. This is the rebirth of our Burminator, the enigmatic machine. I think the first one we captured was, this is Burmy 1 from 2010. The Burminator 2 is now online. You may have seen that in the Light Up the Night parade that we just had. This represents the city's commitment to expending tax dollars wisely and to conserve resources, monetary and otherwise. This is a repurposed ditch cleaning machine. Dan, what's the real name of it?
A force feed loader.
Force feed loader, there you are.
And get credit.
And it removes the once infamous snow berms from the medians of the streets. And so, I mean, I used to get phone calls about this stuff. And since we got the Burminator, I don't think anybody's called me about snow berms.
We used to get phone calls. They're just good now.
It's good. Yeah, it's good stuff. That's like a dance with those dump trucks. It's a cool thing. So I'm thinking the Burminator 1 was purchased for used, obviously, for $2,500 and a little bit of TLC in the shop. As a matter of fact, yeah, John is going to be retiring here, but he's one of the folks who was instrumental in salvaging the Burminator. But it's a pretty good bargain, because before that we might have expended $10,000 on a single snow event. So that's a really good investment. Tyler Palmer and his crew in the Streets and Fleet Division have developed coalition purchasing practices to reduce the cost for sidewalk and road construction maintenance materials for not only Moscow but other participating counterparts around the region. So road building materials. And sand and rock and all of that kind of stuff. They've developed the award-winning Eco Driver program that you heard Keegan speak about earlier, that just teaches people common sense driving practices, including timely reporting of problems with the vehicles. You know, is it making a weird noise? Tell somebody right away. Don't wait. It also involves an annual competition among artists to create these coveted bumper stickers that you see around as well. I started to share this story about EcoDriver with my colleagues on the airport board last week, and they're just kind of thinking it's not a big deal. I mean, teaching somebody not to stomp on the accelerator or not to turn the air conditioning on full blast before you air out the vehicles in the summertime. And then I told them about saving, I think it was $13,000 the first year. We pushed at $18,000 this last year. So it really does make a huge difference in our fuel consumption. And the employees created this. They delivered the program to their counterparts here in the city, and I think it's been so well received by all the departments around the city, because it is the employees themselves have ownership in this idea, and it's brilliant. That department has also initiated the pavement management program that prioritizes the repair and maintenance of streets before they degrade to such a level that they have to be rebuilt from the base up. So that stitch and time saves 9 approach is something that we implement in the streets program. In our engineering department, Kevin Lilly and that group in there have been working on the sidewalk program, and that was something that I was, passionate about from the beginning, to try to get more sidewalks built. But how do we incentivize that for the adjacent property owners? I know Walter Steed has been a real strong advocate for improving the sidewalk system. But this last year, budgetary constraints make it difficult to do this in a community of our size. But we had the Mobility Task Force go around an on-the-ground inventory of our sidewalk resources, and they said, if you just invest in replacing these 10 feet of sidewalk, or you put in a curb drop here, or you get rid of this heaved section there, you can make a world of difference, and not just for people with mobility challenges, people who use wheelchairs, etc., but the casual pedestrian who might fall over that thing, or a parent pushing a stroller or something like that. Our Parks Department does a wonderful job of plowing and sweeping the primary bicycle and pedestrian routes, just in the same prioritization system as we do for motorized routes. So their arterial streets will be plowed first, while our main bicycle routes will be plowed with the Bobcat toolcats that we've had, or the mini dozers that we got out there. Helioterra came along in 2012. This is the first major public art installation that we've had here. It's located in the Wren Welcome Garden just off the South Couplet as you come into town. And a wonderful artist by the name of Robert Horner, who's from Port Townsend, has kind of an eclectic background, and this is what he said of his philosophy. He said, with a background in biology, fine arts, architecture, archaeology, and environmental design, I understand that diversity and collaboration are critical and enriching aspects of successful projects. So I think Helioterra is a model for some of life's lessons. It's a terrific representation of the Palouse. The rammed earth material is durable. It resembles a seed pod, so it harkens to our agricultural heritage. And of course, as heart of the arts, it's a virtual necessity that we have such a thing as that. In 2012, Moscow was one of only 42 applicants nationwide to secure a Tiger II grant. Ours was for $1.5 million for the new Intermodal Transit Center over there off of Sweet Avenue at Railroad. It's the U.S. Department of Transportation funded 3% of the nearly $20 billion in requests that year. So it is to the city staff's collective credit that we wrote such a persuasive grant proposal to be able to secure that funding. That's a terrific resource for it. It's convenient for Legacy Crossing mixed-use urban renewal area. It's on campus. It's a cooperative endeavor with the University of Idaho. It's on the Paradise Path, or proximal to it, so that people can load their bikes on the buses. They can cycle in and hop on a bus to go someplace. The taxis find it a convenient location to come, and so it all around meets a lot of people's needs. Walmart's been around Moscow since 1992, but this was in 2010, and when the store closed, and they were going to open a superstore in Pullman. And so in January 2012, in acknowledgement that ours was a distinct market, the Moscow Walmart reopened. It's larger, it's more environmentally and bicycle, pedestrian, and transit friendly than it was before. And this year, 2013, Walmart contributed $87,500 to Smart Transit for this new bus. Sustainable Moscow Area Regional Transportation. Is that right, Wayne? Mr. Right. CTA, President? Yes, okay. So that's a big deal. And I think it was a concerted effort on a lot of folks' parts, and we were glad not to be left with a dark store. We were glad for the number of people in our community who relied on that Walmart store, and I was among the people writing letters and talking on the telephone to bring that back, and I think it's a win-win for our community. In 2013, the City Council passed the Dynamic Display Sign Ordinance, number 2013-02. It also passed the Gender Anti-Discrimination Ordinance, prohibiting sexual discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodation based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or expression. They also passed Ordinance 2013-15 that supports urban agriculture and the burgeoning local foods movement, and you'll be hearing more about that, council and staff anyway, at our quarterly regional breakfast coming up. I think it's January 8th, on the topic of the local foods movement. Also this year, Moscow's participation in these state and national meetings that I talked about really does help us make help make us more aware of the possibilities out there, the best practices, the unified advocacy that we might generate by collaborating with our counterparts. Those meetings allow us direct interaction with policymakers, such as from the EPA and regulators. They give us platforms to showcase Moscow's successes, and those might be beneficial to our community in ways we don't always anticipate. So it may be a grant opportunity that comes up. It may be an awareness of somebody whose uncle happens to be a big investor and wants to, buy a silo in Moscow, Idaho or something. So in June, actually it was July 2013, I wrote that wrong myself. I remember coming home from the 4th of July event, judging the most patriotically dressed dog with some of you, and there was a message from Washington, D.C., and I figured if they could contact me on a national holiday, I could follow up on that day, and they said, would you like to come on July 9th and introduce the First Lady the next day, and I said, okay. So anyway, the reason that Moscow was featured on that national platform was because of our excellent work with the Let's Move initiative. That was started by First Lady Michelle Obama with the objective of curing childhood obesity within a generation. And you can't force health and wellness on people, but I believe local government has a significant role in facilitating wellness. And that means our bicycle pedestrian trails, our sidewalks, our youth recreation programs, the ball fields project that we're working on. And we caught the notice of the White House. That's a pretty big deal. In October, Idaho Department of Health and Welfare invited me down again to talk about what projects Moscow is working on to promote community wellness. And you might remember that High Five grant that we sought through the Blue Cross Foundation of Idaho. They were paying attention to what we're doing with our farmers market and healthy foods in the schools and the breakfast and lunch programs, reduced cost for low-income households. They paid attention to our Bike for Life activities and the fun things that we're doing in our youth recreation programs. And Moscow was an example that the state of Idaho was paying attention to, and then Blue Cross Foundation saw fit to grant us $30,000 to help us forward those efforts. At a National League of Cities conference in Seattle last month, I was a panelist with the mayors of Seattle, Denver, and Oklahoma City to talk about our much smaller city as being a model for leveraging local resources to make really good things happen. And the vision that was singled out by the moderator of the panel I was on was Legacy Crossing as a mixed-use development project, walkable, bikeable, connecting people, recognizing the role of the built environment in the social capital, as Sarah Church's students were calling it in their presentations today. At this National League of Cities conference, you see a batch of young people up there in that top left corner. Unfortunately, most of those, from our perspective in Moscow, most of those youngsters are from Caldwell, and some, I think, from maybe Nampa. I know it was Middleton this year. I spoke to the mayor of Middleton. I met him at that health and welfare meeting in October, and I told him about this National League of Cities thing, and the next thing you know, he's bringing this huge group of youngsters there, and they love the experience. And Ruben Saryukian, who is a student at the University of Idaho, took me up on the invitation to attend this thing. For a university student, it was just $175, and that included most of the meals for him to go. So I'm hoping that in subsequent years, we're going to see more students, including high school students, attend some of these national conferences. This is a kind of messy slide here, but it's just emblematic of all of the really great stuff that goes on around Moscow, the variety of meetings that are going on, the sorts of people who interact, and anybody who, presentation will be posted on the city's website, so people who are interested in all of the notes that go behind this word cloud image will be able to read what some of those things are. But really wonderful collaborative opportunities in our city. Moscow regularly ranks well above the national ratings for quality of life attributes. You can see the national average is in those little short greenish kind of lines, and there's Moscow in the the lovely aqua-colored bar on this bar graph. In 2012, 93% of the respondents to Moscow's biennial citizen survey rated the quality of life in Moscow as good to excellent, and that's significantly higher than the 75% national average. Bloomberg Business Week rated Moscow the best city in the state to raise kids, and U.S. News and World Report deemed Moscow one of the best places to retire. So I think we have kind of the age range bridge there as well. The biennial citizen survey from 2012 also saw the percentage of residents who perceive the community planning here as excellent or good increased from 27% in 2010 to 35% last year, but that is significantly improved from the low that we had of 2004. So we could have graphed that as well, Bill, and that would have been, that's to your credit. It's a difficult thing to be involved with planning, with zoning, whether you're a volunteer commissioner, you're a policymaker, you're a staff member, in interacting with the public on land use considerations. It can be very controversial, confusing, etc. And I think the staff does a wonderful job of smoothing things over, helping the public understand, helping applicants walk through the process. And if we can do something better, we're receptive to the constructive, civil sort of recommendations that we can do, and I think we are getting better. The construction activity report for the city of Moscow looks pretty good, too. I think this is, we started down there in 2003 with about just under 400. These are for new construction as well as remodels. And during my State of the City address, you heard me speak about the dollar amounts of construction and the commercial construction valuation in recent years. But the reason I selected the actual number of permits sought was because I think it shows the resilience of our community. We've had a recession, but people are continuing to be above the average there. Let's see, we're up right now. We're up above 1,200 permits in 2013 so far. We'll finish out the year with probably a few more, but the average value is number of permits sought is, I think, around 1,010. And from 1972 to the present, the average number of permits sought is just 700. So we're well above those numbers, and it shows that people were maybe not taking on the hugely expensive projects that they would in other economic circumstances, but they were still, trying to fix their houses up, maybe make room for another family member to move in or something like that. They were working on their businesses to make them meet their needs better. But nobody in Moscow just curled up and went away because they were paying too much attention to the dour news on the national media. So, Moscow is a great place to live. We're in a good place now, socially and economically. We heard Deb Reynolds speak so eloquently of the quality of life in this place and how hard it is really to put your finger on it. But we are at a fork in a road, just like I talked about earlier. Our city has choices ahead. We can grasp the idea that new, exciting things are pending, and if thoughtfully implemented, they can be complementary to the traditional ideas that we've had and prepare Moscow for the expectations of future generations. When we go to meetings around the country, we hear what a wonderful model we have in this vision for Legacy Crossing. It's an old idea made new again, and it's replicated all around the world. It used to be the baker lived upstairs from the bakery, or the meat cutter lived upstairs from the meat shop. And now, a couple days ago, I received a Christmas card from a friend in Tokyo who just built a 4-story veterinary hospital. The bottom 2 floors are for their workplaces. The top 2 are for their private and entertainment spaces. This is not an unusual concept, so I hope we adhere to it and really embrace the idea that living and working places thoughtfully interposed is a really good idea. The other thing we're poised for is development of that light industrial park that I talked about earlier, and the prospect of not only growing jobs but expanding the opportunities for careers for people who might seek those professional technical training opportunities, the certificate and apprenticeship programs. We're in a position now to take strategic and equitable decisions about managing our water supply for the whole of the Palouse Basin, and I don't think we ought to wait for a crisis to do that. Certainly, conservation is a huge piece of it. Even if we identify some relatively affordable, sustainable surface water source, conservation still just makes sense. I have a number of unrealized items on my wish list, and I'm going to take advantage of this platform to tell you what some of those are. Establishing a GIS coordinator for a citywide program. A roundabout at 6th and Mountain View. Is anybody taking notes over there? A bicycle pedestrian bridge at 3rd and Mountain View. Even if the policymakers prefer to have that offset to potentially accommodate a motorized vehicular bridge at some future date, that it be much more expensive. There are vulnerable users in the vicinity of that, but a bicycle pedestrian bridge absolutely makes sense. And if you look at the posters that Sarah Church's students put together, you can see that as a major route for those folks who would cycle along there. Remodeling the basement of City Hall for a more usable space, and we're waiting for the facilities plan to come forward so the next City Council may consider that. But I would think that making more usable space in this grand old building is a cost-effective and convenient way to deal with our space crunch here. I think starting a Where's the Mayor's blog would be a good idea. We've I wish I were more tech savvy than I am to have, or maybe inclined to post more pictures of myself doing stuff around the city. But I think for citizens to know what's going on in their local government, not just lists of words on pages, but photos, invitations, exciting outreach endeavors. And I think we can do that with the skills we have in our information systems department. Finish Blackbird Crossing. You took the next step tonight with your vote, and I hope that you encourage folks to get their checkbooks out next to try to make that go on. I do want to highlight a few things that some of our council members said were highlights for them, and this is not exhaustive, but I have all of their lists in their entirety that will be linked to this report. Councilmember Wayne Krause said one of the things he was most proud of was reinstatement of the police reserve program. And Wayne, the chief, agrees with you. He also selected the consolidation with Whitcomb as being a big plus over this last decade. Sue Scott was talking about the preservation of the railroad corridor at the West 1st Street, which is now Lillian Otness Park. Gary Reedner said that retaining the Economic Development Specialist and URA Executive Director, and I completely forgot about that, Gary. That was Jeff Jones does a marvelous job for the city, and it's important work. The advocacy role is probably more than any of us would have anticipated, certainly any of us would have hoped that it would be, but having to go down to Boise and talk to the legislature about the value of urban renewal as an economic development tool, it will remain vitally important, and I hope you all will continue to crank on the ears of our legislators and remind them of that, especially as we have such great prospect of success ahead with Legacy Crossing. And Alturas Technology Park as well, with the sale of those remaining lots. The College Street improvements, that also was one that I have featured at various national conferences, and that's proximal to our intermodal transit center. It's hearkening to our historic heritage of Moscow. I mean, the light fixtures and the furnishings for that street, and it's really a lovely addition that you can keep your hubcaps on now. So that's a with those terrible potholes that thing had. The fiber optic backbone. And Bill, we took that little bitty plane ride to Burley or someplace to talk to was it the Governor's Economic Advisory Council or something, and probably about 2006, 7? 2006, and that was a collaborative endeavor as well. That'll be hugely important for the future economic development of Moscow. Parks and Recreation Department had a monstrous list of stuff. They have been really busy, but something that absolutely caught my attention was the replacement of the unsafe playgrounds. Or I think maybe it would better have been written as Dwight would know the better word for this, but obsolete playground equipment. As standards change for safety, so too must the equipment be switched out. And our Parks and Rec program has been strategic in replacement of those incrementally to provide for the safety and the healthful activities of the area's youth. So as the slide says, citizens of Moscow, it's been a great ride. I so appreciate the opportunity to have served. Thank you.